You know, it's funny. Whether you've written a gazillion books or you've never written a book and you're just starting out, I think that when you're starting a new book, you always have that moment of, oh no, how do I best start this? And if you've done this a million times before, you know that a lot of different things work, a lot of methods work, but you keep wondering to yourself, are there some things I'm forgetting? Are there some things I could be doing better? Could I be setting myself up for an easier time of it? So many of us think that we're meant to suffer through the writing process and that making things easier for ourselves is equivalent to cheating on the whole writing thing, and that it's not fair if we set ourselves up for success in a streamlined and easy way. But let me tell you, writing a book is plenty hard, so make it as easy as possible for yourself. And that includes starting your book in the right way. Not just starting the first sentence, though that is a thing, but what do you do before that? What do you do as you start writing? How do you set yourself up for success in those early stages of writing a book? That's what this week's episode is going to be all about. It's going to be a pretty short one, but I think it's going to be so motivating and so inspiring, especially if you've been thinking to yourself, you know what? There's a possibility that I'm doing this wrong. There's no worse feeling than that. That can totally freeze you in your tracks. So I want to reassure you that usually most of these things are right, but that you have many different choices on how to start a book, but I'm going to help you to streamline the process so that you do it as well as possible and that you're not frozen by uncertainty. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karenna Akavane, on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. Okay, welcome to Writing a Book. Where the heck do I start? Many of us have a ton of different book ideas in our heads, and you need to pick one. This is something that seems like it should be easy, or does it? I don't know. It's a really difficult thing. It's like saying, who's your favorite child? How do you pick one story idea to work on, knowing that it's kind of a big deal, right? It's kind of a big deal. You're going to be picking a story that you're going to be working on minimum for a few months, probably more. So it's not a negligible decision. Oftentimes people will say, just pick one and then you'll be able to do the others. And that's very true. Just because you didn't pick this one idea right now doesn't mean that you'll never get to it. However, there is a lot of investment that happens. So it is a huge decision. So how do I pick my ideas? I look at all the different ideas I have. I write them all down. And then I try to see which one's going to be the easiest one to write. Which one am I most excited about? Which one have I done the most work on? Which one do I think the reader would enjoy more at this juncture? Which one do I think I would have most success with? Which one's going to burn me out or not? These are all really important questions, and there's no right answer, but I think you're going to know in your gut of guts which idea you should go with. And from the moment you decide on which idea you're going to go with, I really recommend that you not look back until you're done with it. Because I know so many people who jump around from book idea to book idea, and they have pages and pages for each one. As many pages as they would need to have at least 2 or 3 books, but they never finish a single one because they can't commit to that idea. So commitment is where it all begins. Pick one and commit to one, and then you can move on after that. Once you've picked an idea, I also want you to pick a genre. Our previous episode last week was all about how to pick a genre and what genres are all about. And I think that picking a genre is really major. You might even want to pick your genre before you pick the book idea, because some of us have multiple ideas in one genre. But if you haven't listened to the episode about genre, definitely go back and check it out. And if you have, I just want to remind you that deciding on your genre is one of those big, big decisions that is going to impact the subject of your book, is going to impact the whole style of it, is going to impact the world of your story, the aesthetics, and who is going to want to read or take on your book. So this is crucial. It's going to have some, which tropes are you talking about? What types of things are expected by your readers? How long is your book going to be? All of that is dependent on genre. So you better know what it is. And again, if you can't figure out which genre you want to write, try some free writing. Try to write kind of the story that you think you want to write, and then ask a friend, hey, what does this sound like? What kind of genre is this? Does this sound like it's going to be a mystery? Does it seem like it's going to be urban fiction? Does it seem like it's going to be literary or historical? Which one do you think it is? And then see how you can apply that conclusion to what you're writing. I talked about free writing, and I'm going to talk about that right now because I think that free writing is one of those fun things to do. I am a huge proponent of planning and of outlines and of knowing exactly where your book is going. However, I often recommend that writers do a little bit of free writing before they actually start organizing. This is because it injects the creativity back into your book. Too many writers tell me, oh my God, well, once I've written the whole outline, I feel like I've told the whole story and I don't feel like writing it anymore. That's a bummer. One of the ways to protect yourself from that is to do some free writing where you show a scene with one of your characters in your setting so that you're getting excited about it before you have to buckle down and actually make that plot work. So definitely give yourself a few days or even a week to free write. That stuff won't be wasted, but it might be tweaked later on as you create an outline for yourself, or at least a timeline. When you're free writing, I don't want you to judge yourself. I don't want you to try to make it as perfect as possible or edit yourself to death. This is really just one of those inspirational tools. Think of it as the precursor to your actual book, and it is not time wasted. This is something that's going to give you a feel for how you want to tell this story. What feels good? What do you think is going to work for this particular story? Is it different from the way you usually write? If so, keep that in mind. You're going to want to see how you can make your writing consistent throughout, especially if it's in a new style. Now, I would like you to think about your characters. Characters are one of the most crucial things in most books. Characters are the people that the story happens to. They're the people who drive the story, especially the protagonist. So I want you to think about, who am I going to have in this story? They don't have to be human, but they should definitely have some relatable qualities. So if they're not human, they should be humanoid or be animals who have a consciousness that is human enough that the reader can really get invested. You're going to want to have a protagonist, and the protagonist is that character who has that main character energy. What do I mean by that? I mean that they're the ones who are actually acting to move the plot. They're the ones that things are not only happening to, but they're making things happen in your book. So they don't need to be somebody who's super important. They don't need to be a prince or a princess. They don't have to be somebody with superhuman strength. None of those things, but they do need to have the qualities that makes them the best person to be driving the action and the plot in this book. I think that's really important. And once you have your protagonist, think about who is a worthy antagonist for this protagonist. Who is the person or what is the force that's going to be trying to prevent my protagonist from getting to their goals? That's really crucial too. And your antagonist usually comes after the protagonist just because there needs to be some kind of a mirror that's held up to the protagonist. So this antagonist has some things in common with the antagonist. Maybe they come from the same place or they have some of the same values. Or maybe if the protagonist doesn't watch out, they're going to become much more like the antagonist than they would have liked. Look at Star Wars, for example, with, kind of the dark side of the Force. That's an example of this. Once you have your protagonist and your antagonist and you've figured out how their relationship's going to work, think of your cast of supporting characters. Now, I know a lot of writers who come up with entirely too many supporting characters. I don't think you need supporting characters necessarily. These are just there to give dimension to your story. And if you have supporting characters, think about what their roles may be. Are they a sidekick? Are they somebody who helps? Are they somebody who impedes? Are they somebody who provides a romantic relationship? Are they somebody who's a mentor? Think about which archetypes your supporting characters are going to go along with, because if they don't have an actual important role and archetype in your book, they don't need to be there. And of course, you're going to have some scenes where you have to have a crowd. You don't need to name all of those characters. So supporting characters are just that. They support your plot. They support your main character, and they're there for a reason. When you're doing all of this, you might want to think of your characters' names. Some people overthink this entirely too much. I would just say pick a name that sounds good right now. You can always go back and tweak it and do find and replace, and that's going to be just fine. Once you have your characters as well, that's when you're going to start thinking about character growth and character arcs. Where does your character start now? What are their qualities and what are their weaknesses that need to be addressed? And where do you want them to be at the end of the book? Make sure that that is crystal clear in your mind, because it's crucial to your plot. Now comes a part that most people think is one of the most fun parts of writing a book, and that is coming up with your setting. Settings are so important to books. Think of Harry Potter. Harry Potter would be nowhere without Hogwarts, without those kinds of settings that are where the action happens, but that also shape the action and that also fire up the reader's imagination. So if you're thinking of your setting, you want it to be unique. And that doesn't mean that it needs to be someplace that nobody's ever seen. It can be unique in that it's in a small town that feels identifiable or relatable to many readers. It can be unique in that it's a specific forest that has a specific kind of tree that your characters are going to be looking for to help people to cure sickness, something like that. So think about how your setting is unique, how it helps or hinders the action. It can be a complete character of its very own in that it's either helping or hurting your main character as they try to attain their goals. So the setting is really, really important. And it's not just how it looks, it's also how it feels. It's, the things that are available there. It's the time period. It's the mood that the setting is going to set. All of that is absolutely crucial. So a lot of writers start to world build, that they create these things after they've created their character Bible, they have a world Bible. And I would say be really careful, because that world Bible, that sounds like it's huge, doesn't it? It sounds like you're creating a whole world, and fun as that might be, that doesn't really help you to become productive with spinning that world into your story. So I would like to caution you against research-itis. This is something that I used to do entirely too much. I would research my whole world. I would want to make sure I have all these amazing details in the world. I wanted to make sure I got them right. I wanted to know everything about the world. And then I would struggle because I spent so much time doing that. I would want to put it all into my story. So I'd have a lot of info dumping and random facts that didn't even need to be there. And then sifting through that information to try to fit it in somehow in a way that didn't feel like it was awkward. That took me a million times longer to do. So I would caution you against researchitis. And the way you prevent yourself from getting this researchitis is write your story first, just knowing the basic world that it happens in. Don't worry about any of the research, and then go back and look at how can I make this scene more vivid by researching the setting a little bit better? What do I know about 16th century clockmakers? Okay, I'm going to go back and research this so I can describe what they're doing, so I can describe what their shop looks like. I can describe what their income is like. And also, too many times I see authors that build a whole world, but then they don't have all of those really logical elements, little facts that they need to know that do impact the novel, and then they stuff it full of things that they don't need to know. So this is where I would really say, start to think of your plot first before you succumb to researchitis, but definitely know your setting before you really elaborate your plot too much more. And in fact, that's our next step, is thinking about the plot. The plot of your book. Too many of you say, oh, I've got a great idea for a book. It's about blah. But you just have a premise. You don't have a plot. You just have a situation. You don't even yet have an inciting incident or a resolution of any kind. So it's not quite a story yet. Well, it's great to have a premise. Absolutely, you need one of those. But that's usually what you thought of as, this is my idea, right? I want to write about a girl who falls in love with a vampire. Okay, that's great. That's an idea. That's a premise, but it's not a plot. What happens because she fell in love with a vampire? What happened before she was able to fall in love with the vampire? What kind of problems will happen because she fell in love with the vampire? All of those things fall into plot. And at the very least, you want to know where your story starts, what happens, a few things that happen along the way, and how it ends. In a previous episode, I talked about the story spine, and that's the rudimentary way of writing your plot. The story spine being, once upon a time, there was blah. Every day they blah until one day, blah. Because of this, blah. Because of that, blah. Until finally, blah. And ever since then, blah. Fantastic. That's the story spine. That's what's going to help you to construct a plot that makes sense, that has a story that actually has meaning for your reader. And then you can expand that into the famous outline I was talking about. I think that that's really major. So when you're constructing an outline, and we have a whole episode about making outlines for people who hate making outlines, that can be really useful to you, because I take all the fear out of writing an outline. I show you how it doesn't have to be this rigid, horrible thing. I show you how you don't have to have this specific numbering system or anything like that. Writing an outline for your book is going to save you so much time, especially when you're writing scene by scene, which most of us, or many of us, do. Highly, highly recommend. Once you have your outline, I want you to make sure that this outline communicates really clearly the 5 W's. Who, what, why, where, when. So who's in the story? What do they want? What's going to happen? Why do they want this? And why is it important? And then the where and when these things happen. So that's really crucial, because I think that the last and most important first step of starting to write a book is to decide what is cool about your book, what you're excited about in writing this book. This is going to do 2 things. When you know really clearly what's super cool about writing your book and about, what's happening in your book, the story of your book, and there's no right answer about what's cool. You can say, I love the setting, or the characters are just so awesome, or the storyline is so exciting, or the setting is just, really, really evocative. Once you've decided that, that's going to keep feeding your motivation to finish this book. You're going to keep reminding yourself of why you started writing this thing and why that's a good thing. But also what it does is, when you know what's exciting and cool and novel and fantastic about your book, you'll be able to communicate that clearly to your reader. Keep examining your writing and making sure that you're communicating the awesome parts of your book at all times. That's going to help you to make your book a lot more vivid. It's going to help it to make much more of an impression on your reader. Once you've done all of these things, it is time to set a schedule for yourself, to find a spot to be writing. This is really important, because that way you're not just breaking down your equipment, setting it back up all the time. You're not having to motivate as much. You're conditioning yourself into just getting straight to it. You're going to give yourself maybe a goal and a timeline to hit that goal in. And then, my friend, you're going to start writing. Don't worry if any of these things felt like I just skimmed over it, because believe me, we're going to be talking about every single one of these steps and elements in future episodes. We'll be having things about what makes a great protagonist, antagonist, setting, all of those things, so that you know exactly what you're doing as you start to write your book. If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.